there and welcome to this webinar with Youth Employment UK as we look at supporting young people to fulfil their potential. My name is Laura Jane Rawlings and I'm the CEO of Youth Employment UK, and I'm being joined today by Martin McLean, the Education Policy Advisor from the National Deaf Children's Society, and his colleague Damien Ball, the Youth Development Officer, also for the National Deaf Children's Society. Both Martin and Damien are deaf themselves, and they're using support services today to participate in this webinar. So Damien is working with two interpreters. We've got Brandon and Ryan working with him, and he's using British Sign Language to communicate through this webinar. And Martin is using speech to text service. So there may be a slight delay as we have this conversation today, but it's really important that they're able to kind of communicate with us and share their experiences as we talk about this really important issue of how employers can support more young deaf people into employment. So through the webinar, I'm going to give a brief introduction to Youth Employment UK for those colleagues who have joined us who do not yet know who we are. And then we're going to hand over to colleagues from the National Deaf Children's Society as they talk about the work the Society is focused on around young people. I've got some big questions that I want to put to both Martin and Damien, so we'll get into some of the support questions that we've got around employer access and contact with young people, and then we'll finish up with looking at how employers can become and be recognised as youth-friendly employers with the Youth Employment UK mark. So just very briefly, Youth Employment UK is an independent, not-for-profit social enterprise. We were set up back in 2012 to tackle youth unemployment. Over those years, we've spent that time researching and evaluating and talking to young people and employers to really understand those very difficult, complex issues that create barriers to employment for young people. Our service really evolved because we want to put young people at the heart of everything that we do. So core to our services is young people's voice, and young people co-create and develop those services that we offer now nationally right across the UK. Really important to that is the fact that most young people struggle with knowing what skills they need to move on into work and what it is that employers are offering in terms of the different career opportunities, the routes into different careers. So we've now got a huge comprehensive careers and skills website online that young people can access for free. And in 2019, we had over 1 million young people access those resources, which shows us that young people are really committed to developing the skills and the understanding about the different careers that exist. So that's a core part of our work. We also support employers to help them develop and be recognised for their youth-friendly employment practice. And a lot of that is about changing the way that employers think about onboarding and supporting young people and helping them to connect with some of those young people who are furthest from the labour market. And in today's case, that includes a better understanding of how you might support young deaf people into employment. We connect those youth-friendly employers to our young people through that website mechanism that I've already talked about. Employers that work with us can also access huge ranges of advice and guidance and supporting resources on our website. Employers that work with us also are able just to pick up the phone and speak to a member of team about any of their youth employment needs and opportunities. So without further ado, let's get us into hearing more about the National Deaf Children's Society, and I'm going to hand over to Martin, who's just going to talk to us a little bit about their work.
I'll hand over to Damien, actually, who will start off with introduction to the charity.
So I'm Damien. I'm a Youth Development Officer, and I'm profoundly deaf. So we are the UK's leading charity for deaf children, young people, their families, and professionals. We work to overcome the social and educational barriers, that hold deaf children, young people, back through the, all that's going on. So we are here to provide expert advice, raise awareness, and we campaign for their rights. We're here for every deaf child, every young person, regardless, it doesn't matter what their level of deafness is, or even how they communicate. We offer a range of services, including a helpline, children and family support officers, information resources, and activity weekends. We have recently just launched a new campaign which is called Deaf Works Everywhere.
So I'm Martin, and I lead on post-14 policy and practice at the Natural Deaf Children's Society. And I've been leading on this campaign, Deaf Works Everywhere, which just launched this week, a new exciting campaign for us. It aims to get more deaf young people into work and into jobs that inspire them. And many deaf young people believe their career options are limited. However, for right support, deaf people can work everywhere. Yet they're twice as likely to be unemployed as their hearing peers. But we know from case studies we've been collecting, we found deaf people working in a wide range of roles, from musicians to doctors to electricians. And, the list is endless. However, that information is not cutting through to deaf young people, unfortunately. And through the campaign, we're going to be fighting for better career support for deaf young people, more work experience and volunteering opportunities, as well as, most importantly, it's challenging what deaf young people can actually achieve. So this week, we launched a video which is aimed at deaf young people aged 11 to 15. It's being co-produced with members from our Young People's Advisory Board, and it's designed to introduce young people to our campaign. Through that, we hope to inspire them and broaden their aspiration by showcasing the range of jobs that deaf people do. Laura James, should we have a look at the video now?
Absolutely. Let me take us there.
Deaf Works. The doctor. Deaf travels the world and makes incredible discoveries. Inspired the next generation. Deaf Works as an illustrator, driving instructor, an actor, and engineer. Deaf thousands of people hanging on every word and every beat. Deaf works in a team. Deaf works as a sporting hero. Deaf works as a superhero. Deaf works behind the scenes. Hair and makeup artist. Camera assistant. First assistant director. Voiceover artist. Deaf works coder. Photographer. Volunteer. A barrister. A photographer. Deaf works when it doesn't play. Tell it what you dream. Select bossing and let own our tomorrow. Because deaf works everywhere.
It's such an amazing video, and because of the technology we're using, we don't know how much of that sort of glitched as we moved it from YouTube into GoToMeeting. So there will be a link to that video on our website so that you can access it beyond. And please do make sure you share that video within your networks too. So thanks for the introduction, both of you. That was great. So I want to ask a few questions, if I may, about some of those experiences and challenges that young people are facing and what we can do about it. So if I can start with asking you, what types of deafness are there, and what terms and definitions might employers need to become aware of?
Okay, well, I'll try and answer that. So there are a range of different levels of deafness. So you can have mild deafness raised due to profound deafness. Some people may just be deaf in one ear. Some may be born deaf. Others, deafness will develop later in life. Some people have high frequency deafness, so not able to hear sounds of a high pitch, or vice versa, low frequencies. And so deafness will impact people in different ways. And it's really important to actually take away from this webinar that no two deaf people are the same. I mean, Damien and I are both profoundly deaf. But we have different ways in which we prefer to communicate. So speaking to today, Damien's using British Sign Language. I wear a cochlear implant. Damien's not using any hearing technology today. And yes, I mean, just because I have a cochlear implant which stimulates sounds for me does not mean that I've got perfect hearing. I'm okay lip reading. If people want to run in a quiet room, I can understand most of what someone's saying to me. But if it's a noisy room, or if it's lots of people speaking, then that can be really difficult to follow. So it's important to assume that just because someone's it's important not to assume that because someone's wearing hearing aids that means that the hearing is corrected. You asked about definitions. Some people will just describe themselves as deaf, as I do, as Damien does. But others will say that I have hearing loss or have hearing impairment, and they might not feel that comfortable with the term deaf because it feels too perhaps too strong for them. We, at the National Deaf Children's Society, use the term deaf to describe deaf people with all levels of deafness. I think that the main thing is to really understand how the person you're talking to, that person prefers to be called. They understand how they prefer to communicate and avoid making too many assumptions.
Great, that's really clear. Thank you. And talk to me about the landscape for deaf young people. What are the sort of barriers that young people are facing as they're in education and perhaps moving on then into employment?
So what I've found with deaf young people is there is a lot of confidence issues in terms of trying to gain employment. Gaining employment, there's a lot of barriers with regards to that, and trying to become successful in gaining employment because there's not enough deaf awareness. There's a number of different reasons for these barriers, actually, and I'm going to explain some of them now. So there's actually issues with opportunities in accessing education in terms of apprenticeships, university, etc. deaf young people trying to, you know, find courses and things, there's difficulty having accessibility to these courses. You know, making sure information's clear for deaf young people. Secondly, we have difficulties in terms of limited access to volunteering and work experience opportunities. Some employers don't actually think about how they're going to provide communication service support for deaf young people. You know, it might mean that deaf young people don't have much confidence, you know, to make sure they're achieving these opportunities. Also, a major barrier is obviously communication. You know, deaf young people can be anxious in terms of communicating in a workplace. They might be unsure, you know, what sort of support is available, how to register for such support. Maybe, you know, they might be unsure about, you know, if in the workplace that they have deaf awareness at all or not. So there's many different reasons why there are opportunity barriers for deaf young people.
But just add to that, as you are asking about barriers to education, and unfortunately, although deafness is not a learning disability, we do see an attainment gap between deaf and hearing young people at GCSE levels. There's an attainment gap of around 30 percentage points in proportion of young people who achieve 5 GCSE passes, and that inevitably will limit some options at the age of 16, and deaf young people may need longer to progress through the levels, and it's important for us to remember that when we look at A-level attainment, or that would be BTEC and other qualifications at that level, we do see a similar gap, but deaf young people do make up ground at that sort of GCSE sort of level 2 level. So we do see a closing of the attainment gap. And that's just, it's really just about having that time to progress and actually finding the right I suppose options for right courses at the age of 16, where they do make good progress.
Martin, when you were talking about the new campaign, you did talk about careers advice and aspirations. Is that another barrier when you think about that education setting?
Yes. Our Young People's Advisory Board carried out some research last year where they interviewed people responsible for careers provision in their schools. They also ran various focus groups with deaf young people across the UK, and yes, what we're finding is that deaf young people are not getting good careers advice. If they do see a careers advisor, often the advisor is not deaf aware, doesn't have an understanding of the support that is available to deaf people in the workplace. And unfortunately, some deaf young people are getting some quite negative messages, which is impacting their thinking and the sort of choices they make. And there's various stages in which young people are making important choices. For example, in year 9, you're choosing your options at GCSE. If you believe that there's no support available to you in the workplace, the support is incorrect because there is, then that may well be influencing the decisions you make. It's just not good enough, and we would like to see a better system in place for careers provision.
Absolutely, thank you, and thanks for sharing that. And Damien, what is it that you think employers can do to create better opportunities for young deaf people, thinking about work experience or early career opportunities?
It's important, that employers, that they have a good attitude. It's important, to remember about, in terms of deaf awareness, it's not only just about communication, there's more to it than that. It's about understanding the needs of deaf people as well. It's about, early prevention and thinking about them as an individual. Employers need to find out about information about how to support their staff as individuals. About the employer in the workplace as well, and making that accessible. They have to think about how to train the wider organisation as well. That's also important. Here at the NDCS, we have training as well, and that's called Accessibility for Deaf People in the Workplace. That's a one-day training course that we have. And the focus of that course is, in terms about the recruitment process as well as a whole. And, thinking about the workplace and how to make that more deaf-friendly. Employment also has to think about, as well, promoting their opportunities as well. That's also important. In the deaf community as well, and how to publicise that for people, and thinking about how to make them relationships with deaf people directly.
Great. So if an employer listening to this webinar today wanted to find out some more information, see what support was available to them, what would you recommend, Martin?
Well, if we look at slide 11, Laura Jane, then there's 3 links on that. The first one is to an information booklet that we publish for employers. It's a sort of short, straight to the point sort of guide that provides practical guidance on the sort of reasonable adjustments employers can make. Many of these adjustments don't cost anything. For example, ensuring that meetings are booked in good time in advance if communication support needs to be arranged, or ensuring that colleagues correspond by email rather than telephoning. So that's available to download free of charge for any employer at the moment, and with the campaign we plan to update that resource. The next link is to the Access to Work scheme, which is a government scheme, and it's really valuable for deaf people because it will cover the cost of communication support at work, such as business sign language interpreters we have today. Also, there's part funding for cost of technology, such as radio waves, which supplement hearing aids, cochlear implants by amplifying sound and making it clearer, cutting out background noise. Can be helpful for some deaf people in meetings, for example. So scheme is a really essential scheme for deaf people at work, and it's not, I have to say, the easiest of things to apply for. Sometimes young people need some support with the application process, but once you've got your support package in place, it's really helpful. And then the last link is to the Disability Confidence Scheme, which is another government scheme which employers can sign up to say that they are a disability confident employer. and that allows them to display a logo which says disability confident, shows disabled applicants that this organisation has thought about accessibility to disabled people. So in order to be disability confident, you have to agree to certain steps. In order to get the first level, you would have to do something like, for example, have a guaranteed interview scheme for disabled applicants that actually met all of the job criteria that help to overcome some of the disadvantage that disabled people might face. So those are three I think useful forms of information support that employers should be aware of.
That's great, and all of these links are available on our website to access, so please do make sure you go and download those booklets particularly. And you've provided us with a top 10 tips for communication tips for our employers. Do you want to walk us through these and what they mean?
Okay, so the first tip is to find out about the deaf person's, communication needs, what their preferences are. Some may prefer to sign and some may prefer to speak. Some perhaps maybe use both. And secondly, we have to think about, how to get the deaf person's attention. Some people may wave their hands in the air, or they may tap on the shoulder perhaps. Always have to ask the deaf person as well, that is important. Number 3, making sure that you're facing the deaf colleague when you're talking to them. Because if you're looking around or turning away from the deaf person, they need to be able to lip read you clearly. Number 4, so making sure that you're speaking clearly and naturally. Number 5, watch your mouth. Some people, you like to cover their mouth with their hands, or they might have chewing gum as well perhaps, and that can change the lip pattern of the mouth as well, which is really distracting for deaf people. Number 6, make sure that you're being quite really visual as well for the deaf person. You could point to things that you could be talking about, or you can gesture as well and use body movements for that. Number 7, make it clear what topic it is you're actually talking about in the conversation. Perhaps you're in a group and the deaf person decided to join in on the conversation. You have to stop the conversation and make sure you're making what the conversation is actually about. Number 8, make sure that you're standing facing the light. Because then that means your face is clearly facing the deaf person and they can see you clearly. If there's a light behind you, your face will darken and it'd be quite difficult for deaf people in terms of communication. Number 9, like I said before, if you're having a group conversation, make sure that only one person is talking at a time. If there's overlapping and talking, it can be really confusing for the deaf person. It can really disorientate them in conversation. And finally, number 10, make sure that you're reducing background noise. If it's a noisy environment, that can really distract the deaf person, so if you can reduce that noise, that's brilliant as well.
And I'll just add to that, that not all of these tips would apply to every deaf person at one time. Like, for example, if you were using communication support, you had a BSL interpreter version, but some of those might not apply. And some deaf people, for example, might just like to have a quiet environment, but they don't rely that much on lip reading. So when you get to know a deaf colleague, you will just naturally find out how they best communicate, and which of these tips will be most useful.
That's great. And I think it's important for employers to know that they can and should be looking to find that information out so they can make the engagement, the communication experience much better for everybody. They're nodding at me. Yeah, great. So thank you so much for that. That's really helpful. And we know we're going to put lots of links on our site to the National Deaf Children's Society to make sure that our youth-friendly employers and organisations who want to learn more can find out where they can go and do that. And it's a really important link for us is to help those employers that do want to be more inclusive and make sure they're offering good quality opportunities to all young people, to make sure that those employers are easy identified. And we do that through the Youth Friendly Employer mark. With that mark, you're then able to show young people that you're an employer of choice and an employer that is committed to providing that inclusive and quality opportunity. So take time, please, to go and have a look at what joining up to the Youth Friendly Employer mark means and all of the benefits that come with membership to us, including, as I said right at the beginning, the ability to telephone and call and speak to an expert here and find out the answer to any question you might have regarding your youth employment strategy. And none of us can do this alone. We want to make the world a better place for all young people. Youth unemployment has been a problem for far too long, with too many groups, and particularly those vulnerable groups, experiencing multiple barriers to employment. So we work in collaboration with a great number of organisations and encourage more partners to get involved with our work so that we can really work together to make a difference for young people. So a big nod and thanks to just some of the partners that we've been able to list here. And finally, for those of you that would like to find out more about working with either Youth Employment UK, or if you would like to be put in touch with either Martin or Damien and colleagues from the National Deaf Children's Society, then please do drop me an email at ljr@youthemployment.org.uk, and I'll happily pass your contact details on to the guys and answer any questions that you might have about our work and how you can get involved in supporting what we're doing. So that just leaves me to say a really big thank you to everybody that supported this webinar to happen today, to Martin and to Damien, to Brandon and Ryan, and to Kate, who is doing the speech to text support for Martin. Thank you all for joining us. I've really appreciated this opportunity to share the work that you're doing, and a big final call out to your campaign, and congratulations on the launch of that. We'll be supporting as much as we can. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Laura James. Been a pleasure.
Thank you.